Well, we have officially entered into the season of Lent. It started Wednesday with our online community worship service, with a reminder that it is from dust that we have come, and to dust we shall return. And together we acknowledge that we are mortal and vulnerable. We are not the creators of our world. But we are also reminded that we are beloved, children of a creator overflowing with unquenchable love, unwavering compassion and forgiveness, and unending hope for who we can be. So today, as we begin this journey of Lent, we return to the story of the life of Jesus as told in the Gospel of Mark, picking up as he was baptized by John in the Jordan River. Now, as Mark describes it, he was coming up out of the water, and he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him, and he heard a voice from heaven saying, "You are my Son, beloved, with you I am well pleased." And if that wasn't enough mystery for one day, the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness for 40 days being tempted with the wild beasts and the angels with him. I love that last sentence. He was in the wilderness being tempted with the wild beasts and the angels. So recently, I watched the movie version of the Broadway musical Into the Woods. And this is a movie I saw when it first came out in the theaters, and I really liked it because I love musicals. But it picks up a new level of fun and fascination after spending a few years watching every Disney movie that is out there with a bunch of 3 to 5-year-olds. This movie in particular mixes up a few of our favorite fables and fairy tales. If you haven't seen it, we meet Cinderella and her heartless family and her charming prince, along with Rapunzel and the witch that locked her in the tower and her very determined prince. And then we meet Little Red Riding Hood and Jack with some magic beans, and 2 angry giants and the village baker and his wife. And they all make their way into the woods at a time of transition in their lives, with difficult, dangerous decisions to make. What they all had in common in this story was that someone was drawing them into the woods, into the dark, dangerous, unpredictable forest. Now, there's almost always, some wilderness experience in these stories. Some trek into the forest, into the woods, off the beaten path. For the wilderness seems to be an image that resonates with every culture in every time. We know that the early Romans had many superstitions about the dense, trackless forest. In early civilizations, the forest really was uncharted territory. There were wild animals hidden in the darkest heart of the woods. And there were bandits and thieves that could hide themselves in the forest, ready to pounce on anyone brash enough to step in. Now, in our favorite folk stories, the villages are the places that people call home. These are the places that represent safety and comfort, and generally do not include frightening beasts or mythical creatures. There are challenges in the village life, but those challenges are those that can be anticipated and expected. But the forest represents all that towns and cities are not, all that is untamed, uncontrollable, mysterious, and wild. The idea of the forest as a place of testing is frequently found in folk stories and fairy tales. The challenges that the forest holds, while difficult and sometimes deadly, are there to shape the character of those who are able to overcome them. The wilderness is portrayed as a place of temptation, representing all that is dangerous and exciting. And the forest, much like our own world, contains a mixture of good and evil. And these stories are there to remind us that both good and evil exist in the deep, dark places of our worlds. revealing both dark shadows and patches of light. Fairy tales were created to put some kind of face on the deep sense of evil that we experience, whether it's witches or giants or ogres or devils. These characters help us face and understand all the elements of our lives that are out of control. Those elements that make life difficult, that thwart our ambitions. Some of those wild beasts exist on the outside. Some of them reside within our own hearts and minds. So back to our story. In our story, we are told that the Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness. This is more than an account of a specific event in the life of Jesus. It is telling us something more about who Jesus was, and since we are followers of this person, it is telling us something about ourselves and our lives as well. Now, what happened to Jesus is physical, and it's tangible and immediate, and it's urgent, and it is an event that shows us and guides us on our paths and gives us hope. So just as his head is bursting out of the water and he opens his eyes and he saw the heavens split open and a dove descending in his direction, and through the water flowing over his ears, he heard a voice from heaven say, "You are my son. You are beloved. With you I am well pleased." It's a very physical and almost mystical experience of acceptance. It is a statement of what is. You are already accepted, and it is a word of promise into the future. You will continue to be loved. But then after this affirming encounter, the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. No time to waste, no settling in, no basking in that moment of glory. No, it's on your feet and on the road until there is no road and only wilderness. Only you and the wild beasts. The wilderness represents places we go to shed the distractions of everyday life, a place to throw off anything that protects us from feeling what is really going on inside. The Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness, and I don't think he just sat down on a rock and settled in there. I think he kept on moving and walking and stopping and resting and praying, I'm sure, but also experiencing the heat and the cold and the sore muscles and the loneliness and the silence and the haunting sounds of those wild beasts. So maybe we need to ask the question, well, why did Jesus need to go into the wilderness, and why did we? Jesus was sent into the wilderness knowing who he was, where he came from, knowing who his family had raised him to be and who God was calling him to be. He went in the wilderness to be strengthened and to face his demons and to prepare for a much longer journey that would take him to the cross. Now, when we talk about facing our demons, we're not talking about anything out there in the world. We are referring to what is inside, our fears, our anger, our history, including those parts of our history that we have so carefully hidden from ourselves. Jesus was going to have some very difficult, very painful choices to make on this longer journey to the cross. So in the wilderness, he took time to wrestle with his past, with the past of his ancestors, what they had done right and wrong, to wrestle with the temptation to run away or to just go back and be normal, just fit in. It is a spiritual truth that in order to make conscious choices, we first have to uncover what is unconscious, what is hiding beneath the surface in our hearts and our minds, keeping us from knowing what we truly need to do and who we need to be. If we want to be all that we were created to be, we too need to face our demons, our fears, our past, and whatever is tempting us to give up and give in. One of the songs in the musical Into the Woods is titled, "No One Is Alone." It goes in the first line, "No one is alone. Sometimes people leave you halfway through the woods. Others may deceive you. You decide what's good. You decide alone, but you are not alone, for no one is alone." In fairy tales and forest folk stories almost always have helpers. And stories give faces to the helpers in our lives, often depicted as fairies or animals, but they are standing in for the people who come along our journey through the struggles with us of change and transition, a necessary part of our lives. So for Jesus, we are told there were angels in the wilderness. And this is a comforting truth, and one that we can recognize too. If we open our eyes, if we take a good look around, somehow, somewhere, help comes, rest comes, solace comes. Our angels don't always appear in the ways we expect or in the forms that we might prefer, but they come, and we are not alone on this journey into the darkness. Now, this past year may have felt like a long journey into the wilderness. Life may have already forced you to let go of some things that you depended on and thought you could not live without. You may have been led into a dark forest of loss and confusion. You may already feel tested beyond your limits, but you are not alone. God is still with you. God's people, your family of faith, walk with you through your forest. This year may have brought to our consciousness things that we did not want to see. Maybe the privilege that we don't want to see because, well, then we would have to admit to those with privilege, equality feels like oppression, but it's not. And the knowledge causes us to change. Facing our demons, our wild inner beasts, and necessary, an aspect of life we need to be willing to walk into and partake of if we want to live to the fullest. To live God's abundant life is not always easy. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "I went into the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to put rout to all that was not life, and not when I had come to die discover that I had not lived." It is the Spirit of God that sends us into the wilderness, into our wilderness journey, that we dare not come to the end of our journey and discover that we had not lived the life that we were given. So may you, in the midst of difficult times or the approach of unexpected troubles, may you embrace your wilderness journey knowing that you are not alone and that you are always beloved. And now let's sing.